Just start the recording. Okay, two Jennifers. It's my lucky day. We're going to talk about rethinking scheduling to support all learners. I'll probably go through this pretty quickly. It's the last session of the day. After 3 days, if you've been here with us, you're probably getting tired. I'm Lori Hersick, staff developer for inclusive practices and least restrictive environment with the LIU. We've gone through our norms. We want you to be engaged, so please ask questions if you want. We honor all expectives and assume good intentions. Act 48, because this is the last session of the day, don't forget to go back to that matrix, and at the very top, click on that evaluation and complete that. The first 100 people who get that turned in, who were also our first 100 to register, get the book. So if you were like 102 to register, but you get your evaluation in quicker, chances are you're going to get a book. So go ahead and make sure you get that done. Our outcomes. I want you to consider and define your school's priorities when building the master schedule. And the resources that are available to you, the space, the staff, the time, and how to stretch them. So current practices, when building a master schedule, who's involved? Do you have veteran teachers? Do you look at your honors classes first? Do you schedule around sports and coaches? And then who's involved in building that schedule? Is it the principal, the guidance counselor, or the teachers involved at all? And think about, what are your core values when you build that master schedule? If someone outside of your school looked at that schedule, what would they think is the biggest priority to you? What process do you go through to build that? Is it, I need all of my coaches scheduled first because they need to be able to leave early last period of the day or something like that? And then what are your primary influences? What would be your non-negotiables in building a schedule that cannot be changed? And then what are competing priorities for time? When in your schedule is there time for remediation and enrichment? That's really hard to build in sometimes when kids, I think at the elementary level, you might have a little more flexibility, but it's difficult if you have remediation specialists coming into your room to try to schedule that. But when you get up to like high school level, it's really hard to schedule for that time. Is there time in your schedule for collaboration among teachers? If teachers never have time to talk about the students, especially students with special needs and their special ed teacher, it's really hard to get on the same page in how to support that child. And do you encourage planning between the general educators and special educators and interventionists through that schedule? So current classroom trends, this is looking at from the 89-90 school year, there were 34% of the students with disabilities received services in general ed. And now all the way up to 2017-18, 63.4% are receiving a majority of their day in general education. So if your school district has about 15 to 18% population special ed, 63% of those kids are spending a majority of their day in the gen ed classroom. So how do we schedule to have those kids have enough time to receive the support that they need, and for the general educators that are teaching them to have the support that they need? We all have to kind of work together and share the wealth and share our knowledge with each other. So how do we do that during that work day? This also just breaking that 63.4% of students with disabilities spend 80% or more of their day. Another 18.3% spend 40 to 79% of their day. So just adding the two of them together gets you in the 80% area of kids with disabilities in gen ed classes. And so if you think of art teachers and gym teachers, chances are they have every student with disabilities. How do they support those needs when they're, and who do they go to if they need help? So how do you build a schedule to meet the needs of today's general ed classroom? It feels like we're drowning, right? With all the mandates that we have to meet. So special ed reconstructed under, when it was constructed under the Handicap Amendments Act, which later became IDEA, it pursued this medical model logic. If you were in an earlier session with me, we talked about this, where we look at students with an IEP as if they need to be fixed. So we need to kind of reconceptualize that and look at it. And when we're looking at those students with IEPs, they only get to participate in gen ed classes if it's deemed that they can handle it. And unfortunately, sometimes that decision is made according to data, but sometimes it's made according to a guidance counselor who schedules them in the classes. Sometimes it's made because all of a sudden your district decides all of our learning support kids are included for reading and math, or some broad statement like that, whether the kids are prepared for it or not, or whether the classrooms that are receiving them are prepared for it or not. So we look also at special ed teachers as if they'll fix the students. And if they have some kind of magic wand where they can handle students better than anybody, those students better than anybody else, and that's really not true, because our gen ed teachers are the experts in that content area. And so they're going to be able to deliver that content in a way that kids get a good basis in it. And then our special ed teachers support the skill deficits. So we both have to work together on both sides of the table. The difficulties with this view of special ed, when we're looking at special ed from that medical model of kids needing to be fixed, we then on top of that had Every Student Succeeds Act, which is evaluating the progress of specific groups. They look at special ed in its own population, English language learners in their own population, low socioeconomic is its own population. And so if any of those areas, you have groups of students who stay almost plateaued and don't show from year to year that they are making gains, your school can be placed on those watch lists or tiers of improvement, where they need to write improvement plans around these categories. So on top of that, with your IEPs and IDEA, it evaluates the percentage of time that students are in gen ed. So the answer is put them out there. We'll just take, gen ed will take everything. Well, again, we're not preparing general ed teachers for that responsibility and for the needs that some of these students have. So if we decide to change, we're going to look at this. Some of the challenges are that general educators are used to referring difficult students to someone else, and they feel very poorly trained to meet their needs. So we would have to institute, and we should have instituted a long time ago, training for our general educators in strategies and how to make their curriculum available to a broader audience. But again, we're looking at scheduling. So how do we find the time for that? Especially with things coming at us over the last decade of trauma-informed practices. We had to all go through training in like mandatory reporting. We all had to go through training on like intruder drills and all those things. There's so many things that have come at us over the last decade that it's been really hard to find the time to work on curriculum and our education and what we're supposed to be about. So that is something we need to look at. And then special educators, if we make that change where we're pushing kids into gen ed more, they feel disconnected from their students, like they don't know them. They don't know the needs of those students if they never get to see them. And also I was a special educator for 12 years. We feel a sense of ownership and protectiveness towards those kids. I know that there were times, unfortunately, that I might have limited my students in that protective vein, where I was so worried because I knew a certain teacher would be difficult, or I knew curriculum in a certain class would be difficult. Instead of challenging my students to step out there, I protected them and like, we'll just do it in my class. And I should not have done that. I should have pushed with the support that I could have given them. But they were my kids. They're not really, but they felt like they were. So how do we find a balance? between supporting the students and getting them out there the way the government says we're supposed to, the way that the laws say we're supposed to, and really truly what is good for them, along with preparing teachers to handle that changing classroom of today. It's been changed for a long time, and it's only getting to be a heavier and heavier weight for classroom teachers. So we really need to support them, or we're going to get to a breaking point. So we need to look at that. Multi-tiered systems of support is what these last 3 days have been about. They improve outcomes for all students through that continuum of services with academic, behavioral, and social instruction and support. And so how do we schedule around this MTSS framework? It's easy to schedule this tier 1 piece. That's class schedules. How do we schedule in that secondary level of support? We're saying this is added time and added intensity. Where do I find the minutes in the day? And then this third tier where a kid needs really intensive one-on-one, who does that and at what time during the day? So that's really difficult. And if you're not looking broadly at your master schedule to find that time, it's an uphill battle that you can't win. We've got to come at it ahead of time with our schedule instead of trying to find the pieces after it's already built. So if we rethink how students are supported, instead of focusing on what's missing with the student and focus on what is missing from the lesson, you know, we can't change what we get, so we have to change what we give. And this was a statement from Dr. Young out of her book. Sorry, no matter where I put this, it feels like it's in the way. And so, you know, you have to think about that. If, you know, taking the keys to run this classroom, what do I need to have in place? I can't assume that it's a problem with the student every time. It's also got to be what's wrong with my instruction and how can I find the time to support them? We got to rethink labels. We got to replace this disability construct with human capabilities framework, looking at individual strengths and limiting issues. So if we start to pull our data for our school, what trends do we see? What strengths do we have and what deficits are present? That really, it's hard to tie that together, but if you think about your schedule, if I see that we really have a strength in, I don't know, it could be an academic area, but it could also be in that I know I have enough teachers to cover all of my reading classes. We do a fantastic job focusing on reading and early literacy in our building, but our math scores are really suffering because we're not spending as much time and focus on that. Well, then I know my data is showing me, because my math scores aren't high, that's something my building needs to focus on. If it's my special ed group, well, what is lacking in my special ed group that isn't giving them gains? And we can't just say, oh, they're special ed, that's just the way they're going to be. We have to show reasonable gains in students, no matter their label. So how do I build my schedule or work with that group to improve their instruction and what they need? If the instructional data reflects the need for improved tier 1 instruction, how does your schedule reflect that need for that targeted core instruction? Are you supporting teachers? Are you setting them up in co-teaching schedules where they can not only work together, but have planning time together? Like, what is your priority to help build that tier 1 instruction? And where does the data reflect a need for more intensive tiered intervention, and how do we fit that? And then you can get down to a classroom analysis. What's the typical portion of learners with diverse needs in a gen ed classroom? Once we start to build that schedule and I start building in co-taught classes, I cannot throw every student with an IEP in that co-taught class. That's not reasonable. I can't have a population of 50% special ed and the other 50%, we'll just put some of our struggling learners in there. Well, that becomes then a segregated special ed class. It defeats the purpose of co-taught. Co-taught means that portion of students with special needs in that class should reflect what's a normal percentage of special ed population in your whole school. might be 15 to 20%. So that should be about the same percentage in that class. And it also then does not become a dumping ground for every other kid that has special needs, like English language learners, low performing students. Because what happens then, teachers start to view that class as my low group, and they don't challenge them and they don't push them the same way as if that class was a typical gen ed class. We hear that all the time with teachers: labels, labels, labels. This is my honors group, I can give them this work. This is my general class, I can't give them anything. Well, what's wrong with our instruction that we can't challenge them that way? So we've got to be very careful of those labeled classrooms. What staff do you have to support the level of need, and what resources, professional development, ongoing support will be needed in the future? Do you ensure in your schedule that general educators and special educators have access to each other for those pre-instruction conversations? One thing we look at with co-teaching models is co-teaching does not mean a general educator runs the room and the special educator's back here floating around helping everybody. In a true co-teaching environment, you both have equal responsibility for every student in that room. You have equal ownership of that classroom, of instruction, of assessment within that classroom. So how do teachers prepare that? They've got to have a good working relationship, so they need time for that. And so how do we build that time into our master schedule? And then we get down to the educator themselves and looking and analyzing their schedule. On average, how many collaborative partnerships are educators expected to maintain? So I particularly think of special educators. I taught 9th through 12th grade emotional behavioral support. So I had almost every teacher in the building who I had students out. I had 9th graders in 9th grade history. I had 10th graders in 10th grade history. They were taking health classes. They were taking English classes. There's no way I could have collaborated with all of those teachers. I was patching stuff together, trying to get lesson plans, trying to get assignments to help my students. So that's not realistic. What are the expectations relating to those partnerships? So how much do we expect if a teacher is co-teaching? They really should not have to co-teach with more than 2 or 3 different teachers, because there's not going to be enough planning time in the day to make all of those partnerships work. And then vice versa on the gen ed side, you got to think of every class period has kids with IEPs. Do I have to meet with every case manager of every student? So think of those partnerships that we're expecting. And then what supports and resources and structures can be offered to those educators? With special ed caseloads, do special ed teachers have access to general ed conversations and meetings? This is really important when you start to look at how you use your special ed staff. If I have a special ed teacher who has to go into a chemistry class first period, an English class second period, and an algebra class third period, that's 3 different, completely different subject areas. So how do I keep track of all the conversations that are happening between their teams? And especially if one was a 9th grade level subject and another was 11th grade subject, that's not only grade level teams, subject area teams. So maybe I choose my special ed staff to be more specific and in an area. Maybe my special ed teachers at that secondary level, one has all the history classes, another has the science background and English. So I'm working within that team. Or vice versa, maybe that special ed teacher has a grade band. So I'm going to work with the 9th grade team. This person is going to work with the 10th grade team. How do we help build those relationships by making caseloads realistic and schedules realistic? And then do they have time with each other to plan instruction, design data collection, have conversations around that data? When does this stuff happen? If we're saying it's good practice, how do we build it into our schedule? Do you also encourage collaboration through your schedule? What are the protocols for conversations? A lot of times when teachers get together, They kind of get stuck talking about that one bad kid or this horrible assessment or something like that. So what do we have in place to keep conversations on target and using time as wisely as possible? We're saying time is at a premium. So how do we use it wisely when we come together? Maybe you have a protocol around data and we're saying, look, every 2 weeks, we need to be meeting about such and such data and having a real conversation about it. So we are setting up, and maybe that goes into a folder where your principal's checking it or something, but making sure that time that we do have is used to the best and maximum that we have. So think about what is so important that you'll spend a lot of time teaching it. You'll spend a lot of time assessing it. You'll have data-driven conversations about it. You'll intervene on it, and a student can't move on without it. That's what you're focusing on sometimes in some of those decision-making meetings. Co-teaching. This is really hard to build a schedule around. So what I'm trying to get you to think through this discussion is, what is your priority with scheduling? What we need to start with is not scheduling around coaching and around teachers who've been there the longest and want their favorite schedule. We need to look at groups of students who have the highest need and start building schedules that way first. That's your honors classes and your special ed classes, because they're in short supply. So how do I plan them first, giving them the schedule they need to also have co-planning time, and then filling in everybody else who's going to be just fine with that schedule the way it falls out. So look at co-teaching, what it looks like. You know, if we have to share responsibilities for all students in the class, we have to have co-planning time and time, assessment time, and time to look at data on that class. Just teachers know how to use different models and how to take that leadership role, and is there that shared planning and prep time? So let's look at building that master schedule. First, this is out of Wayne Saylor wrote a lot of articles, and I think he's out of Kansas University in their special ed department. He's a lot of great articles that I've read. But the first thing you do is consider your space. When's the last time you sat down and thought about all the space in your school? And is it being used wisely? Some buildings are stretched to the max. You've had influxes for the last couple of years, and there isn't a single space in your school that's probably not being used every class period. Others maybe have a little bit more room. Think about all the ways that you can use the space in your classroom. And if a classroom's sitting empty, what can we do with it? So you gotta think about the layout of those spaces, how they're being used under the current master schedule, and decide if you're using it in the most efficient way. So it may be a little space you can bring a couple of kids into to do some enrichment activities with, or to do some practice with, to help them fill in those skill gaps. Consider all of your staff. Has the leadership team looked at how to use all personnel? Now, Saylor talks about using everyone, even janitors and stuff like that. I'm saying teachers, staff, and paraprofessional staff. Are you considering, are they using their time most wisely? If I have special ed teachers running a resource room that all they're doing is necessarily helping kids with homework and outside assignments, paraprofessionals could handle that. I would rather that special ed teacher be filling in skill gaps with instruction. So how am I using my staff to the greatest potential, and stretching them as far as I can within reason without breaking them? How can I give them the space that they need while we're meeting all the student needs? And then organizing that personnel. MTSS for all students can provide a driver for organizing available school personnel. It's an configuration through scheduling that can enhance the social academic outcomes for students. So again, organizing them using that MTSS umbrella to make sure we're meeting needs for students. So if I know in an elementary group that all of my first graders do their intensive reading instruction from starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, I want to make sure my interventionists are available to that first grade class to go in and work with those students. And then I may have to work around my other classes that they're doing a different time so that we can use all of the staff that we have in the best way. Also think about how you use your paraprofessionals. A lot of times paraprofessionals are assigned to one classroom. They may work with this emotional support class. I know how to paraprofessional full-time in my class. If they're assigned to a student as a PCA, that's in the IEP. There's not much you can do to change that. At least the way the law is written in Pennsylvania, that is a service for that student, and the district is paying specifically for that para to be with that student. But maybe the para is only with them part-time, and during other times they can be doing something else. But consider a different way to maybe assign a para to a grade level. Maybe teachers within that grade level, when they team, can determine how to best use the para and who needs that person during which class periods. And don't use paras for things like copying and stuff like that. They're there to be instructional help, to help students who are struggling stay on task or complete assignments. Also consider, instead of grade level, maybe them being related to a content area. That way they're getting down and deep into that content and they really know it after a couple of years, and they can really help students. And they can be a shared resource, and they can really be a partner in that collaboration. This team protocol I shared, it's in your folder. I went through some of these questions. I'm hoping it opens up correctly here. But this is a team protocol you can go through in building a master schedule. And if you really want to look at how you can change your master schedule, that is not going to happen between July 29th and the opening of the school year. This is something you might take a whole year to look at and develop, so that maybe next year, hopefully all this chaos of COVID will be done, but then you would have a better plan for how you can address that master schedule. It absolutely has to come from your administration down. I know teachers don't have power over the master schedule, but through leadership, you can start the discussion and work with them to reconsider how our schedule's configured. And you probably know the problems and holes in your schedule if you're living it every day. But this walks through a reflective part, getting people just thinking about what are our priorities right now. And here's different tools that you can go to. There are reflective questions, and a lot of this I went through, but as a team you would sit down and think about these things, and as honestly as you can answer, the better discussion you're going to have around it. Then you start to look at your data. Are there holes that we need to fill? Are there things that are missing that we need to really look at? And then we start those team meetings around, okay, how do we create a better master schedule? And they give ideas here of timelines, how long the discussion should last, and some topics you might want to look at when you're developing that as a team. So this is just one way to kind of walk through that process. Again, it's a long process, but we really need to start thinking from that MTS perspective. How do we build that schedule around the neediest students first, so that they are getting their needs filled with the right staff, and then working to fill the kids in who are probably going to learn with the right structure almost anywhere we put them. So we don't need to build a language arts schedule and then a history schedule and throw it all together. It's got to fit like pieces of a puzzle, and that's easier said than done. I think if I was a building principal, to me this would be the worst job I would probably have, is how to build this schedule. So get input and don't do it on your own. It is not something one person can tackle. It is a huge feat. So pull in the people to have those discussions with you. Just getting back out of that. I just got to find my PowerPoint again. I think that was the end. Dun, dun, dun. Yep. And then the next one was just the resources that I use, where I got this from. Again, this is a bigger discussion, and you have to have inclusion in mind when you build this. And that's hard to do when we're looking at inclusion from that medical model, but more on what students need, and the MTSS model is a better framework. So this is your last session after 3 days. If you've been here all 3 days, you are my heroes. You made it through. I hope it's been a valuable way to spend your time. I hope that you could see the way that that MTSS academic, gets in place, and then the MTSS behavior, they fit together, because behaviors often caused because of struggles in academics, and struggles in academic can be caused because of behaviors. So that fits together. And then inclusion ties all of that, because we need to find better ways to meet. Our kids are amazing and unique, and we don't want to squash that uniqueness. And we don't want to label to the point where kids know that teachers don't want them in their room, because kids read that, they feel it. So I'm hoping this all ties together for you, and you've got a lot of great information, and I hope it was a great way to spend your summer days. They're running short. So if you have any questions, please stick around and ask. I'm going to stop the recording. You can put messages in chat, but then otherwise you're free to go. Don't forget that evaluation. Thank you so much.